The night was quiet except for the occasional creak of the swings and the distant hum of traffic. Lina sat curled up on the cold metal of the swing, hugging her thin blanket tightly around her small frame. Her shoes were worn, the soles nearly gone, and her hair stuck to her face from the damp evening air. She watched the streetlights flicker, casting long shadows across the empty playground. A plastic water bottle rolled slightly near her feet, a reminder of her day scavenging for anything to eat. The sandbox, deserted and covered in dew, smelled faintly of wet grass and dust. She pulled her knees closer, trying to make herself smaller, hoping the world wouldn't notice her. Somewhere far away, laughter and music drifted from nearby apartments, a life she longed to be part of but could never reach. Lina's eyelids grew heavy, the cold seeping into her bones, but she forced herself to stay awake, fearing that if she slept too deeply, she might wake to find herself alone in a stranger's place, or worse, chased away by someone who didn't want her there. She whispered a soft promise to herself, a ritual she had repeated every night: tomorrow will be better. Tomorrow I'll find something good. Her voice was barely audible, swallowed by the night air, but it gave her courage. And though the playground was empty and unforgiving, it was hers for these few hours, a fragile sanctuary where she could rest her weary body and quiet her anxious mind, if only for a little while. The shadows shifted as a car's headlights passed by, illuminating her small, determined figure. Lina's gaze followed the light, but she didn't flinch. Survival had taught her to be invisible, and yet, in the stillness of the night, there was a quiet strength in her eyes, a spark of hope that refused to be extinguished. Damien Blackwood's sleek black car rolled slowly down the quiet street, the engine humming softly in the night. He was returning from a late meeting, his mind filled with figures, contracts, and deals, when a flash of movement by the playground caught his attention. At first, he thought it was a stray animal or a stray piece of trash being blown by the wind. But as his eyes adjusted, he saw her, a small girl, wrapped in a thin blanket, sitting on a swing, shivering slightly. He stopped the car, the tires crunching on gravel, and leaned forward, studying her carefully. Her clothes were worn and tattered, and her tiny frame looked painfully fragile in the cold night air. Something stirred in him, an unfamiliar twinge of concern that he wasn't used to feeling. Normally, he would have driven past, dismissing such sights without a second thought. But tonight, he didn't. He stepped out of the car, the crisp air biting at his coat, and approached cautiously. "Hey," he said, his voice low but firm, careful not to startle her. Lina looked up quickly, eyes wide, brimming with a mixture of fear and defiance. She instinctively tightened her grip around her blanket, as if it could shield her from the world. I'm not going to hurt you," Damien added, keeping his distance but making his presence known. He noticed how her small hands trembled, how her gaze darted toward the empty streets as if expecting someone, or something, bad to appear. Lina's voice was barely audible. I'm fine," she said, though her teeth chattered slightly. "Go away." But Damien didn't move. There was a pause, a moment of silence where the cold air seemed to thicken, and then he asked gently, "Do you have somewhere to go?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her that before, not like this, with concern instead of judgment. She hesitated, the corners of her mouth twitching as if unsure whether to trust him. Finally, she shook her head, her voice trembling. "No, nowhere." Damien crouched slightly, lowering himself to her level without breaking the invisible barrier of space she needed. "Then let's find you somewhere safe for tonight," he said quietly, his tone carrying the weight of authority and calm reassurance. He didn't push, he simply waited, giving her a choice. And in that pause, Lina felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, an offer of help without expectation, without danger. Damien waited patiently on the edge of the swing set, keeping a respectful distance as Lina shifted uncomfortably under her thin blanket. Her eyes, large and wary, darted to him and then away, tracing the empty streets as if looking for an escape route. Damien's sharp gaze softened as he noticed the bruises faintly shadowing her small wrists and the way her shoes were nothing more than tattered soles barely clinging to her feet. Why do you sleep here?" he asked gently, not wanting to startle her. Lina hesitated, her fingers clutching the blanket tighter. Her voice was barely a whisper, but there was a brittle strength to it. "It's safe," she said, as if repeating a mantra she had told herself 1,000 times. "No one bothers me here." Damien nodded slowly, understanding more than she realized. And at home? He asked. Do you have a home? The question seemed to pierce through the protective wall she had built around herself. A shadow crossed her face, grief mingling with the cold of the night. No, my mom, her voice cracked, and she swallowed hard, forcing herself to continue, she's gone. And my dad, he doesn't care. I stay here 'cause it's the only place I can be alone but not completely invisible. Damien felt an unfamiliar pang of empathy, the kind that didn't belong in his calculated, controlled life. He had always believed wealth and power could solve problems, but nothing had prepared him for the stark reality of a child surviving nights alone, relying on courage and hope rather than protection or comfort. Lina, he said, his voice steady but softer now, you don't have to be invisible anymore. You don't have to face this alone. Her eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief crossing her face. Alone, she whispered, as if the concept itself was foreign. Not alone, he reassured her. I can help. I can make sure you have a place to sleep safely, food, school, everything you need. You don't have to spend another night on this swing. Lina looked down at her small hands, still clutching the blanket, and hesitated. Trust didn't come easily to someone who had survived the streets and the silent cruelty of abandonment. Yet, in Damien's steady presence, in the calm conviction of his words, she felt a faint spark of hope, a fragile seed that maybe, just maybe, someone could care without expecting anything in return. The wind rustled through the playground, carrying with it the faint scent of wet grass and the distant city lights. For the first time in a long while, Lina allowed herself a quiet thought. Maybe tomorrow could be different. Damien led Lina carefully to his car, keeping his voice low and calm so as not to overwhelm her. She hesitated at the door, glancing back at the empty playground as if it were the only world she'd ever known. Her tiny fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket, and Damien knelt beside her, meeting her gaze. I promise, nothing here will hurt you. Just come with me for tonight. We'll figure everything else together. Slowly, she nodded, stepping into the warmth of the car. The leather seats smelled faintly of cologne and expensive polish, so foreign compared to the damp metal of her swing. She shivered slightly, not entirely from the cold. Damien glanced at her, recognizing the tension coiled like a spring in her small frame, and silently reminded himself to be patient. Trust was not something given freely, especially to someone who had known only abandonment and neglect. The drive through the quiet streets was a contrast to the chaos of her mind. Lights blurred past, reflecting in her wide, wary eyes. Damien kept conversation minimal, allowing her the silence she seemed to need, occasionally pointing out mundane details. That's the bakery where they sell the chocolate croissants you like, he said softly, sensing her attention drift. She offered a small, skeptical smile, the first real one he had seen, and he felt a subtle warmth spread through his chest. Arriving at Damien's mansion, the sheer size of the place seemed overwhelming to Lina. Marble floors gleamed under grand chandeliers, and the walls were adorned with art she didn't understand but felt the weight of. Damien guided her gently, showing her to a cozy, softly lit guest room. A bed with fresh blankets, a pillow that smelled faintly of lavender, and a small stack of books greeted her. She ran her hand along the sheets, marveling at the softness, almost afraid to believe it was real. I don't want to be a burden, she murmured, her voice almost lost in the vastness of the room. You're not a burden, Damien replied firmly, kneeling to meet her gaze. You're just someone who deserves safety and care. That's all. For a moment, Lina simply stared, as if trying to memorize the reality of kindness. She hesitated before speaking again. Will I have to leave in the morning? Damien shook his head. No, you'll stay as long as you need. We'll work out school, food, everything else tomorrow. Tonight, just sleep. You've earned it. That night, for the first time in countless weeks, Lina curled up under warm blankets without fear. Outside, the city hummed softly, but inside that room, there was a fragile sense of peace. Damien lingered at the doorway for a moment, watching her small chest rise and fall with sleep, and he realized that the encounter at the playground was only the beginning. Something had shifted, not just in Lina, but in him. And as the night deepened, the cold millionaire found that for the first time, he wanted to protect something with all the warmth he had long buried inside. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Damien's mansion, painting the room in warm golds and soft shadows. Lina stirred under the blankets, blinking against the brightness, unsure whether the world she had woken up to was real or a dream. The unfamiliar comfort of a real bed and the gentle hum of the house felt almost too much to believe. Downstairs, Damien was already awake, moving through the kitchen with the precision and calm of someone accustomed to control. The smell of fresh coffee mingled with baked bread, and he carefully arranged a plate of fruit and warm pastries on the table. When Lina finally descended, still rubbing sleep from her eyes, she froze at the sight. The house was vast, elegant, and immaculate, a world so far removed from the playground that had been her home. "You don't have to be afraid," Damien said softly, noticing her hesitation. "Breakfast is ready. And after that, we can talk about school and everything else." Lina approached the table slowly, her movements tentative. The plate of food seemed almost foreign in its abundance, and she hesitated before picking up a piece of bread. Damien watched her, a mixture of curiosity and concern in his eyes. He had faced countless challenges in business, but navigating the fragile trust of a child was unfamiliar territory. As they ate, he asked gentle questions, her favorite colors, the subjects she liked, even small things about her past. Lina answered cautiously at first, but gradually, the walls she had built began to crumble. She spoke about her mother with soft reverence, about the playground as a place of both safety and loneliness, and about the little dreams she still held onto despite everything. By midday, Damien realized that his life, once defined by contracts and cold efficiency, had shifted in subtle but profound ways. Lina's presence brought warmth into rooms that had long felt empty, laughter into hallways that had only echoed with footsteps and silence. Yet outside, whispers of society's judgment lingered, neighbors who didn't understand, family friends who questioned why a wealthy man would care for a destitute girl. But Damien didn't waver. He understood that what Lina needed most was not just shelter or food, but belief that someone could care for her unconditionally. And as he watched her attempt to draw a small picture of the playground she had left behind, a smile tugged at his lips. In that moment, he knew that their lives had entwined in a way that would change both of them forever. The day closed with a quiet understanding between them. Lina had found a place where she could finally rest, and Damien had discovered a reason to soften the edges of his carefully constructed world. Outside the mansion, the city continued on, oblivious to the bond forming within, but inside, a fragile, unspoken promise lingered, one of safety, trust, and the hope of a brighter tomorrow.